I'm incredibly intuitively driven. I do not listen to my logical brain anymore at all. You ask about inner peace, that's your solution. Right there. It's simple. One piece of advice. Your brain's telling you to do it, check in with your heart, feeling, your intuition, and if it corresponds, do it, and if it says no, just don't do it. No questions asked. And if it tells you not to go to the coffee shop you go to every morning and to go to a different one, just go. And if nothing happens, move on with your day. Every single human who feels like they're not successful is on what she calls a plan B. And the way to get back to your plan A is just to simply go back to listening to your intuitive voice. Your intuitive voice is undeniable and very clear, and it's always there, and you know it, and you've listened to it, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, whoever you are. I can give examples to skeptics, but there really aren't any. Most people, even the most atheistic, like Richard Dawkins fan ever, will admit that there's this feeling system in us called intuition, and it does work, and it has powers to it.
Welcome to the Derelict Podcast. For the disparaged, depleted, and delinquent souls trying to find our way, we're talking about the scary part of the journey, where we don't know how it'll end. Let's be free to face our fucking failures in real time as the most unadulterated, truest version of who we are. No sugarcoating. Welcome to the shit show, you derelict.
All right. Well, welcome to the Derelict Podcast. My name is Josh Abandonato. I am your host, and we have a very special guest today, Mike Oppenheim. And he is here to inspire and motivate you to think and laugh about inner peace. How do you laugh about inner peace? I love that, Mike. I think that's fantastic. I don't think I know how to laugh about inner peace yet, so I'm really looking forward to it. So welcome, Mike. So glad you're here.
Hey, yeah, it's great to be here. And definitely laughing is the key to everything as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it sure is. So Mike and I met online. We chatted a little bit and then had a phone call. And his story really intrigued me. He also, man, you're a Renaissance man. I was reading through some of the stuff that you do. And goodness sake, I don't know how you have all the time in the day. But you know, for our listeners, obviously all of these things, please check the show notes right now for resources. I'm going to put Mike's website up there and a few other things. But one of the things that really stood out to me is you've written a weekly fun essay since 2006. Seriously?
Yeah, seriously.
That's almost, wow, that's when I graduated college. That's almost 20 years ago. That's fantastic. I love that. And it's called You Are Here. Check it out. We'll put a link to that. And then in 2021, so just about 3 years ago, him and his wife and brother started a metaphysics podcast called Coffin Talk, which sounds really fascinating to me. So tell us a little bit about it. Tell the listeners a little bit about it. What is it? It's something about, like, you know, what happens after death, right? That kind of concept.
Yeah. I think the best way to lead into it is the explanation comes first, which is I was a hospice volunteer for a long time. And one of the things I noticed all the time on the job was that most Americans in particular are really unprepared for death. They don't want to talk about it. And then when it kind of hits or afflicts them, not usually the person dying, but actually the people around them, it's a big deal. And so in the hospice care, it wasn't usually the patient themselves, although it was sometimes who was freaking out or not prepared, but it was very often like the family members. So I decided to start interviewing people about what they think is going to happen when you die, because I think based on what you think will happen to you when you die, that's going to kind of clue you into what you're going to feel like if you ever have like a bad diagnosis or just like, you know, the end is coming. And so the podcast, I mean, we've had 170 something guests. I'd asked you if you can come on it, and you've agreed, so I can't wait to interview you.
I can't
so
wait.
Please
it's gonna
don't
be great.
give your answer right now.
I will not.
Yeah. And that's kind of the pivotal moment of the podcast. So the podcast is about half an hour long each episode, and we don't ask it at any certain point, but usually about halfway through I tend to ask it. But I kind of interview the person to see like what they've become, who they think they are, that kind of stuff, like in life. And then I try to like ask them that question, and then we try to work out, well, how has that affected like your attitude? Like, so, you know, if someone who, for example, lost both parents before they were 10, they've been thinking about death a lot their whole life. Like, they're definitely prepared for it in some way, but, you know, some of them are really happy about it. Some might be like a little bitter. Some have like done things with their life to help others. You know, there's just so many things. But to be very honest, it's become a very selfish project because I'm always elated when I finish. Like, the person's story gives me hope. It inspires me. It brings me to like a better state of mind. So I love doing it. And my wife and brother are critical. I would not be able to pull it off without their help. So.
That's fantastic. I actually have another guest for you that I think would be fascinating. It's a
Love
lady
it,
I
yeah.
knew back in the day, and she turned herself into, she's a speaker and a business coach and a bunch of other things. But one of the things that she did when she was writing a book, which I think would be interesting, is she visited 50 funerals in 50 days.
My God,
Just
please send me her contact. That's perfect. Yeah.
no idea who they were. Just went there just to hear how people spoke of someone, and then wrote a book about it. And I literally just messaged her the other day. I was like, "Oh man, that would be perfect for your podcast." And I'd actually love to have her on here as well because it'd be interesting. We'll talk about other things. But yeah, that'll be a good one for you. I'll get it. So. A few other things about Mike's bio real quick before we dive into today. He also makes music, a few different bands that you're a part of. You write novels. It sounds like you've been doing that for a long time, which I'd love to touch base with you on because I'm actually in the middle of my first book. Cool. And getting closer by the day. He runs a writing workshop. You love drinking coffee, eating avocados. Sound like a good hipster. I got my hipster beanie and hair going today, so I look like somebody who drinks coffee and eats avocados. And of course, his favorite part is his family, his son and 2 daughters, which we are going to talk about a little bit today as we discuss failing as a dad in the 21st century. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this topic up based on our conversation, Mike, is both of us have very different experiences, obviously, with, you know, kids and wives and ex-spouses and all these sort of things that occur. And I don't know about you, but I just find myself really intrigued by that whole conversation of what's happening in today's society, especially in the United States of America. I know this is not universal, but just the role of dad specifically, what that looks like in parenting. And then that goes to masculinity, healthy masculinity to bring into parenting, quote unquote, toxic masculinity, which some people believe is a thing, some people don't. More podcasts on that in the future. But yeah. I think that, at least for me, there's not a lot of spaces that I see right now about being able to be honest and vulnerable and talk about being a dad right now, because we just have to have our shit together, right? And I'm not saying moms don't. Moms definitely do. Some moms have to have their shit together even more so than anybody else. My girlfriend is a solo parent. There is no dad in the picture, and she has to do everything herself for her son. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying she doesn't have any pressure. She has a fuck more pressure than I do. However, it's just interesting how much this conversation has evolved and how different it is than, let's say, even our parents, you know, generation. So I'm really looking forward to having that conversation with you, and I know we're going to dive into it. So real quick, before we do, though, there are 5 questions that I like to try to ask every podcast guest because it just gives me kind of an interest in you know, what this podcast is all about. And I might ask some of them throughout the episode, but I want to at least start with the first one. What in your, let's say in a very short, you know, maybe 1 sentence answer, if you can, how would you define failure?
Not meeting an expectation that you absolutely planned on achieving and admitting it. And that last part is very important.
Admitting it makes it a failure or doesn't make it a failure, or what do you mean?
I mean, even I actually struggled with the word admit, and I almost said calling it, but that's like so casual. But like, there's something about like
an acknowledgement, like a
because I have said I failed at something many times, and the person next to me has been offended, and they've been like, I don't call that failing, and I think your standards are too high. That's it's mean to other people who can't even achieve what you did. Like, and I'm not bragging at all. I'm not saying I achieve high things. It's just it's so personal, you know. Like if you're like someone who's losing weight and they like start out at 330 pounds, it's quite an achievement to like walk around the block, literally, you know. And if they couldn't finish that lap, they would say they failed that day, and then they'd get up tomorrow and they'd try again, right? So that's like a concrete definition of failure. But that person doesn't have to say they failed.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I was actually one of the guests that I had on here recently, which I'm so excited for her episode to come out. It's going to come out pretty soon. But one of the things that I noticed about our conversation is that she really had a hard time with the word failure. And I noticed that a lot of people do, because I think, and I don't know, maybe I'm the only one, but for me, it also produces a sense of shame, or it can. Yeah. Right? Like, oh, I am a failure versus I have failed. Right? We've all failed. Yeah. But I could tell with some people, they even have a hard time just using the word, like admitting that there was ever even a failure, which to me, I've gotten to a point where I embrace it because it's like, fuck it, bring it on, right? Like, let's fail so that we can get better. I mean, that's the only way I've ever been able to get better in my life is by failing. But we're so scared of talking about it. And we're so nervous, I think, of bringing it up unless we've already gotten to a point where we've arrived, right? Where we've had so much success. It's like, well, now I can talk about my failures. So one of the things, I love your definition there. That's fantastic. And I love that for you, it sounds like, well, part of the definition of failure too is that I need to learn from it and move on and get up and try again.
Well, and that's what's so stunning to me at the age of 42 is when I was approaching 40 and thinking I was failing at all my life goals because I had not achieved them, literally, it started to dawn on me that what I was really trying to say and what I was really doing to my wife and my parents and the people who love me is just being a giant whiny baby and trying to get them to tell me I failed. Like I was like gaslighting them in reverse to like call me a failure. And the reason why is because I wanted to quit because I was just tired of trying. Yeah. And so I didn't quit. And actually right around the corner of that, I achieved like several life goals, like very quickly. And that was shocking. And then I just keep thinking now with other ones, like, just don't quit. You can say you're failing so far or whatever word you want to use. And it doesn't even hurt to use that word, but like failure and quitting are like ancillary terms. And somewhere in this conversation, we're going to figure it out. We haven't fucking figured it out, but like there's something that we're talking about and it's like between these two things. You get what I'm saying?
So I absolutely get what you're saying. Yeah, I had an interesting. So a friend commented to me about the few episodes of the podcast that he had listened to so far, and he's like, I really like it, etc. He's like, but I have a hard time with the word failure. I mean, he was one of those people, and this is a guy too, by the way, that I'm planning on having on the podcast. I actually literally just texted him about it this morning because he's a serial entrepreneur. He's pretty much, societally failed at everything, just like me. Business, marriage, fill in the blank. We failed at everything, right? And he's finally gotten to a point where he's okay with that, and he just keeps going, and he tries the next thing and everything else. So he's going to be a fantastic guest. He's also just hilarious. So I'm looking forward to it. But one of the things, it was interesting to hear him say that, of all people. Right? Like what, I don't know what it is societally or that we hear that word and our ears just kind of cringe and we're like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to get there. I want to arrive first. I want to have the success first. Then maybe I can talk about it. Why do you think it's so hard? And maybe this is unfair because maybe it's hard for everybody, but we are two guys. So let's just talk about being a guy for a second. Mm-hmm. Why do you think, especially in the United States of America, maybe you could broaden that to Western civilization, it is difficult for guys specifically to kind of be vulnerable and honest and authentic about failure in the middle of it? What do you think so difficult about that? Yeah, go ahead.
It's a great question. My answer is pat, but also absolutely true to my experience, which is socialization. So I can't answer whether it's just United States, Western world. It could be, for example, there might be an Asian person in an Asian country who was socialized by their parent. I know that, like, I was born in 1981, you're what, 83, 84. The pecking order on the playground among guys, and keep in mind, if you're a lot younger, none of us had heard the word transgender ever, like, at that era. It doesn't matter if the person was or wasn't. That's not what I'm speaking on. I'm saying that, like, guys were separated from girls all the time. PE classes were not co-ed a lot. And when it's just guys, especially in that high school locker room, holy crap, like, we are mean. And even if I'm not mean, we are mean. Like, it doesn't matter if you're like, and as a matter of fact, if you're nice, it's not going to pay off. Like, you want to keep that straight face. If another kid's getting picked on, within 1 second, you're either sticking up for them and getting picked on, or you're keeping your mouth shut, or you're going to join the pack of the kids picking on them. And everyone knows this experience. People have probably been all three. Some people may have only been one or two. But the point is, that right there, I think, is where, like, the real breeding of what we just started to talk about comes from, which is, like, anything that makes you someone who can be picked on in guy culture, in our generation, in our country, is horrible. Because it's, even if you're, like, okay with it on the inside, it's really hard to stand in a room while people are calling you names or making fun of you or calling you that thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it's a great answer. in no way by my next statement am I going to talk about reverse racism or any of that sort of stuff. But my only statement is both of us are middle-aged white men. Surprise,
Yeah.
surprise, middle-aged white men on a podcast. Shocker. It was actually one of the reasons honestly, it was one of the reasons it took me so long to start this podcast. I was like, dude, another middle-aged white guy doing a podcast? Like, really? Seriously? But that being said, I think we have, it's almost like I can't even say this next statement in these days, but I think we have unique challenges right now because we are boxed in. If we are a, successful, middle of the road, middle-aged white person, white man, especially, it's like, here's the box that society wants us to fit in, right? And what if we don't fit inside that box? And a lot of the times I feel uncomfortable even saying I don't fit inside the box because then I feel like I'm going to get judged and shamed and like it's my fault somehow because I'm white and middle-aged and successful, right? And again, I'm not talking about reverse racism here. I just think that as a dad, then it brings in really interesting things of what do I even feel like I can talk about? Like if it's not in this box, am I okay talking about it? Which is part of the reason I started this whole podcast in the first place. Is like, could we just talk about this stuff in real time? Because I know for a fact from personal experience, even including you on the phone, that when two guys get together and somebody gets naked first, they get vulnerable first, right? Not in a sexual way, obviously, but like somebody gets, I just realized after I realized that, I'm like, oh, I'm pretty sure that clip is going on social media, what I just said, when two guys get together and get naked. But when one decides to be vulnerable first, then all of a sudden the stories just spill out, right? Like it didn't take much for me to be a little vulnerable with you and then you to kind of just tell me your whole story, right? But for whatever reason, that first step is kind of difficult. So why don't we do that today? So why don't, if you're comfortable with it, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear, briefly about your story, about your son and different countries involved and everything else, because I think that it's a very unique perspective that, maybe some people won't be able to relate to exactly. Like I won't. I don't have the exact same story. I went through a divorce and I have 3 kids with this woman and it was very contentious and there's a lot of problems and there still are a lot of problems, but it's very different than your story. So what I'm hoping is that people that are listening, if you're a dad, pay attention. If you're not a dad, pay attention, because I think that your story really brings forward a lot of this kind of in the box thinking versus I'm just trying to be a good dad. So that was maybe kind of a long-winded setup, but I want to hear about your story, man. Like tell me about your story, about your son and different countries involved and what happened.
Yeah, that all worked. I do want to make 2 brief comments on the first part of what
Sure.
you said about white guys and also starting a podcast. As far as starting a podcast goes, I think there's a lot of imposter syndrome out there, and I think that's like a feeling people have. But every single person on earth should start their own podcast if they fucking want to, and you shouldn't feel ashamed or whatever. And I think it totally ties into what we just talked about, which is like, it's not succeeding or failing if you're the next Joe Rogan or you're the next welcome, get in line, like middle class podcaster who has like 100 to 1,000 fans, and you get some downloads and you get some feedback and you move on with your life. So that's statement 1 is just, I feel comfort in you saying that, and I understand that feeling. And then 2, as far as the white guy thing goes, I think I'm a very good person to talk about that too, because I am part Cuban and I'm from the Bay Area, which means I grew up in the hive mind of making white people feel shitty about being white. And I want to say that 1, it's mostly led by white people. Believe it or not, very few people of color actually give a shit. And also people of color would be kind of annoyed and pissed if 2 white guys on a podcast were talking about them. They'd be like, yeah, talk about, stay in your fucking lane, talk about yourselves. So I don't think there's anything wrong. Yeah,
I don't know.
I can't say that. Yeah.
No. I can't speak the experience of a black man or a Cuban man or anything. Like, I don't know, man. I'm not Asian. I'm not black. I don't know. All I can speak to is my mutt European heritage.
Well, and that's the funniest part is I only said I'm part Cuban because it's this fucking stupid card I get to throw on a table if someone starts giving me shit. And I was told that by my minority friends when I went to an all-women's school for grad school, and they let me in.
Interesting.
So I was getting a lot of like shit for being a guy, and they'd be like, first of all, who gives a shit? But secondly, just tell them you're Cuban or Jewish. And the Jewish one is freaking weird though. I don't ever like throwing that because I don't practice it and I'm not like observant. But I mean, I know Hitler come after me, so I gotta like respect that. But as far as and then here's where it gets even weirder because this is going to completely dovetail into what you just asked me to talk about, which is I have a son from a previous marriage, and then I have 2 daughters in my current marriage, my last marriage, the good marriage, the one that I will work hard to make work.
Congrats, brother. Congrats. Keep it going.
Thank you. Yeah. I did not fail. So the son, he'll be 9 this year, and I may slip and use his name, but I'm going to try to just call him my son for like the sake of his privacy.
Yes,
he is
please.
half Asian. Yeah. His mother is from was born in America, but she's Thai. She grew up in Thailand. She was just literally born here, not an anchor baby per se, but her parents met in attending master's school here. Both Thai citizens, not U.S. citizens. Got knocked up while getting a master's degree. Didn't want to fly home to have the kids, so they had her here. Her sister was born in Thailand, but I'm just giving a lot of context because this is a legal story and this is totally going to matter to people. But the point is, since my son is half Asian, I now experience a weird thing, which is I totally get offended by Asian jokes now. Like they hurt deep. Because I picture kids on a playground saying that to my son, or like if a friend makes a comment. Now at the same time, first of all, from teaching ESL for 10 years, Asians are 2/5 of the Earth's population, and they do not feel like a minority. Maybe in America they do, and that's fine. But where my son is growing up in Thailand, he is certainly not a minority. If anything, if they know he's half white, he's either going to get like privilege for that or totally shit on for that. But the point is, that's
is it? I just was going to ask it in Thailand, from your experience, then is it one or the other? Like he either gets elevated because of his whiteness or he gets denigrated because of his whiteness?
It would be like, it's a great question. America's the only country where someone would say like, I'm Spanish, I'm Italian, I'm German, I'm Irish. Like there's no other country on earth that does that. So in Thailand, if you're Thai,
that's
you're
been
Thai,
my experience also, by the way. I think that's good. Worth repeating for everybody that's listening to this right now that maybe doesn't travel very much. And it's all relative. A lot of people travel more than me, but I travel internationally every year. I try to go to different countries and experience different things, talk to the locals, and etc. And again, I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. I'm just saying I like to travel, and my experience has been the exact same of what you're talking about. And that is, I've never experienced another country where people are so obsessed with, let me tell you everything about my lineage this exact moment so you know exactly what percentage of everything I am, which is ironic because we probably have more diversity than most other countries in the world. I don't really know the stats on that, and we're a melting pot or a mixed salad or whatever metaphor you want to use during the time, right? To me, there's nothing wrong with having pride in that. Like I'm half Italian. I'm very prideful of my Italian heritage, my family coming over, and I know when they came over and all those sort of things. And yes, my family was basically the Godfather. I have a bunch of stories about that I haven't talked about on the podcast yet. So I'm very proud of that. However, it's just a part of who I am. Like I don't make every decision being half Italian. And I guess I don't understand sometimes why this country is so obsessed with it. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your story.
No, that's cool. You reminded me, I had a really close black friend. We were like roommates for 3 years and we're still friends. And the only reason I said she's black, for those assholes listening who would give a shit, is it matters in the story. She would laugh because she would say, black people don't wake up in the morning and think I'm black, and then they brush their teeth and go, I'm black, brushing my white teeth and my black mouth. Like, it's so absurd how race consciousness works and all that. So I just love that you reminded me of that. It's so funny to me, and that always sticks to this day. And like likewise, I'm part Italian. Like I said, I'm part Cuban. When I went to Cuba, my relatives didn't say you're Cuban, but they did say your family. So like that was what mattered to them. They're like, your family, like stay with us, do whatever, and they protected me because I was there illegally, and they would like help me hide and stuff. So it was like cool, like, but they weren't ever like, oh yeah, you're Cuban. No, you didn't grow up here. You don't take Castro. He was still alive at the time, and like you don't deal with, neighbors who spy on you and shit.
I was just going to mention this real quick.
That's cool. I get off subject like crazy. So.
ADHD. Welcome to the ADHD podcast. There's a stand-up comedian who's also an actor. I'm going to butcher his last name, but it's Sebastian Maniscalco, I believe, is his last name.
Maniscalco. I just saw him in LA a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
How do you pronounce his last name? Do you know?
Maniscalco, I think.
Maniscalco. It's something like that. I'm butchering being Italian right now by not being able to pronounce his last
Yeah.
name. But one of the reasons I really like him, I haven't seen him yet live, but I want to. And one of the reasons I like him is because he talks a lot about Italian heritage and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And he makes a lot of jokes about how like it's okay to make fun of Italians for some reason, but not other races. And go listen to some of his jokes. Maybe I'll put a clip here in the show notes because I just think it's hilarious. And it's just so interesting to me that different societies will just be okay making fun of certain races and then other races are not okay to make fun of. Or, you know, you look at the history of America and different sexual orientations are okay to make fun of and then they're not, and then genders are and then they're not. And like we go through these, it's like the George Carlin 7 words you can't say sort of thing. And now you can say most of those words, right? Like, but what changed? So anyway, let's bring it back to the story because I think your story does involve some, I don't know if it involves some racism. Maybe that's not the right word. I don't know. Let me just let you tell your story first.
I was born in 1981. I'm a hopeless romantic. My whole life, I just wanted to get married and have kids. Like that was like literally my main goal. Probably because that was my main goal, I could not have been further from it by the time I was about turning 30. I'd had serious girlfriends, but I would always break up with them within about 3 months because they weren't like the one. And I just always knew that I would know when the one came along. I was getting an ESL master's certificate to accompany a different degree, and it was going to help me with like teaching ESL. In the very last class I had, I already was teaching ESL professionally. One of my classmates was this like beautiful Thai girl, but I never talked to her and she never talked to me. And on the last day of class, a teacher got sick and sub came in and she said, I'm just going to break you into small groups. You're all going to be in groups of 3. So she split the class into 3s, but when she got to us, there was no like third person. So she's like, sorry, you'll just be a duo. So I used to tell the story as, and that was serendipity. And I used to tell this as like the greatest moment of my life because that's how I met the future mother of my first child, my son,
Right.
who I love to death. This is important. This is a good part of the story. I will tell this part. This is very important. We started texting and flirting, and it was really obvious that we were flirting. And she had to take a test to get the master's degree that I didn't have to take because I'm a native speaker of English and she's not. So in order for her to get the master's, she had to take a special extra test. She's totally fluent. She was fine, but she has like an accent and she definitely isn't like perfect. So I said I would help tutor her to pass it, which was, just completely a charade on both our parts to set up a date. The morning of like the big not date, I get a Facebook message from a person I don't know, and it says, "Hey man, the girl you're about to take out is my ex-girlfriend. She's the worst person in the world, and she will ruin your life. Run." I'm going to pick her up and I'm going to call her out immediately. Before she even gets to my car, I'm going to say, "Hey, I got this message. We need to clear this up." So I pull up to her place. I lived in Oakland at the time, California. She lives in San Francisco. So it's a long drive. And I get there and she comes down the stairs and she's crying. And she gets in the car and she's like, "Oh my God, I don't even know. I almost canceled. I have a crazy ex. And he was here last night and he was arguing and he found out about you and he said he was going to find you. And he's crazy. You have to believe me. Like he's trying to hurt me. I had to call the police. I'm going to get a restraining order, but I'm not a citizen, so I don't even know if I can." And she's just like a mess. So, of course, I am like a giant sucker for crying, and especially girls. Like, I mean, my whole life, it's just like, and I have
Right.
2 daughters now, so you can imagine how well that's going for me. So my heart melts. I'm immediately like, "Oh, this guy is full of it," and she tells me the story. She's like, he was throwing things at the windows. He was yelling, like all this crap. So I basically completely believed her and I just moved on. But I did block him. I did like after that initial thing. I don't even know if I wrote him back. This is the worst part ever too. I decided to quit Facebook permanently and I went all the way through the thing where you have to like take a photo with like that day's newspaper and send it to them. It's like the biggest pain in the ass process ever. And I did it around like 2015 because I decided I didn't want to have an internet presence. So instead of just deleting the account, which means you could always reactivate it, I permanently deleted it. And then when the whole story I'm about to tell happened, like I went back to try to like get access to him because I wanted to get in contact with him to tell him what had happened and to see if I could get like a little advice. And I couldn't. So to this day, I'm dying.
Oh, wow.
Your name is Vitaly. Vitaly from Ukraine via New York City, who lived in San Francisco and was dating my ex. You know exactly who you are. If you've listened to this podcast, find me. My name is Mike Oppenheim. I would give all the money in the world to meet this guy and just say, you were so right and then some. Like, you have no idea what she did. Like, if you think what she did to you was bad, oh my God. So let's get on with that story. She moves in with me. Her parents are wealthy. So we start flirting, dating, and she's moved in. And then her parents come to visit. Her family liked me. Like, they actually really liked me. And as I tell like different moments of the story, you'll see how much they liked me. And I think that has a lot to do with the backlash actually that occurred. Is like, it wasn't like I was a guy they didn't like. It was a guy they really thought was going to work out and achieve their goals. And one of their goals was to keep their family line going, which means they wanted children. And she
and I don't know about you, Mike, but sometimes I feel like that can be worse.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it also
like,
goes back to this masculine thing we're talking about. Yeah. Yeah. Please keep going.
Yeah, for sure. But I just think sometimes that can be worse, because if they already had the expectation that you're this piece of shit, then fine. Right. It makes everything easy because we already know that this dude's a piece of shit. So we'll just continue with that narrative and everything will be fine. I think that sometimes can make it harder because if you have these expectations like they did of you, of like, hey, this is a good guy and, he's good for our daughter and that sort of thing. When those expectations are shifted or crushed, I think that's sometimes worse. What do you think?
Definitely agree. And but at the time it was definitely like everything was looking good. The one thing I will mention is along the way on this journey of having what's called a cross-cultural relationship, I was warned by everyone in one and people who weren't that they're a disaster and you shouldn't do it. Even a married couple who was one said, it's like, I would just caution you. And the number one thing they said is it was family. They said it's always about family. All of your eventual conflict will come from family. And it's because cultures don't value family the same, even within a culture, let alone, and especially Asian versus American, because in Asia, it's all about your parents and you helping them, not the other way around. And Thailand, as I would discover much, much later, is one of the weirdest countries in the world. They give full emancipation to children, like the right to emancipate at 12. But on the way to 12, a child is treated like an utter baby. Children sleep with their parents up until 10, commonly in Thailand, in the same bed. It's
really
just flip. Yeah, like as I talk about Thailand, one, I'm going to sound like some know-it-all asshole. And I'm only speaking about, like, I lived there on and off for years, and I'm like pretty far into the culture. I speak some Thai, like I'm not super fluent, but I speak enough. So I can tell you that you can disagree with me, and if you're Thai, you can especially disagree with me, but I will tell you I have lived experience on my side, and you can look up a lot of this stuff. But I just find it interesting because I have a son who's in Thailand. I want him to be in my life, and he's not, and I know that there's this weird ticking time clock, and when he's 12, they're going to start treating him very differently. So at the time of this recording, he's going to be 9 in October. So it's very interesting to me to reflect on that and think about. Yeah, so I met her parents. They approved completely. And so we made plans to have a wedding in Thailand, and then to also get legally married in America. I used to live in Portland, Oregon. I was really into bicycling. One day on a Saturday, a car ran a stop sign and hit me. I got a less than normal but still pretty good payout from it. And my lawyer was like, don't spend it on drugs. And I was like, you got it. And so I didn't, and I got a house with it. So that's an important part of the story because I bought my own house in Oakland. It was a condo, but and I was going to live there with her and start a family, which we did while I worked and commuted and all that. And so, but the important thing is I bought the house before we got married. It was like my own property and all that. And California has like ridiculous divorce laws. I don't know if people here understand that every state is different. So to be continued. So we're in California. We're living in my house as an unmarried couple. And then we fly to Thailand for the wedding. And this is the first red flag in retrospect that I should have seen coming. We kept trying to like plan the wedding with her dad, my parents and I. And no matter what we said, he would just kind of be like, no, it's on me. I got it. I'll do it all. I'll organize it. So he just told us like where to be, when to show up, what we had to do. But we had like no say or input. And that I'll take care of it. No attitude is like the steady thumping drum throughout this narrative. Like just anytime I talk about her father, who's really the main, it's like weird, but because in Thailand, a daughter is more like subservient to her father than not. It's really a story of me and this man, and yeah. So
because he's the one making the decisions. It sounds like
he's the one making decisions and pulling the strings, and he's wealthy, and that's got a lot of cachet in Thailand, and it holds no weight with me because I'm from the Bay Area, and I have like a big, really shitty attitude about rich people. It's not healthy. I've worked on it my whole life, but I like even though I was raised like with money, and even though I have money, and even though I respect money, I like spoiled rich kids piss me off. They like I get a really like negative feeling around them, and it's my fault. It's my problem. I'm not saying if you're rich, like I own it, but her dad like loved America for like that attitude. He's like really into making money. He owns like factories. He started all sorts of businesses. He also was born poor and made all his own money. I mean, he's a great guy. Like I actually can tell you that I really liked past tense and respected him, and then now I still respect parts of him and I still like him, and I'll explain how I got there because it's a long story. But I will keep making it quick. So we go there and we have the wedding, but it is like nice. I mean, the wedding was nice, and my parents got to throw the rehearsal dinner and pay for all that and everything. So that, you know, we felt like, but it was always a little weird because, and this is me getting very personal, and I don't normally share this, but technically speaking, my parents had more money than her parents, like, and so it was like weird because he was treating us like we didn't, and it was also weird just because like in America it wouldn't go that way. Like the daughter's family usually does pay for the wedding, but of course you let like the groom, their family have input and contribute. So, but the wedding was nice. It was cool. We had like a Chinese ceremony because their ancestors are Chinese, but they're Thai, and this goes back to the ancestry thing. If you tell them like, oh, you're Chinese, they will like throw hot water in your face. They'll be like, I am not Chinese, I'm Thai, F the Chinese. Like Thai people do not like China, and China, as I learned from ESL, doesn't care about any country around it, so they wouldn't even say, like, they're like, what? Who's that? Oh yeah, there's a country called Thailand south of us. Cool. That's great. Maybe someday we'll take over all their resources.
It's like when I was living in California, then I was moving up to Oregon, like half the people I talked to didn't even know where Oregon was. I was like, you're kidding me, right? Like it borders you. It's north. And every time I would say, like, I moved to Portland back in the day, we both used to live in Portland, right? And I used to tell people, like, I'm moving to Portland, Oregon, and they're like, is that Seattle? I was like, no. Actually, it's a whole nother state that exists, Californian. So that sounds like that. Like, you know, it goes back to this whole, and I think you're probably going to get there in your story as well, but it goes back to this whole idea of the box we put people in, right? So I'll just, you know, like I'm a white guy living in the United States of America, so I don't experience a lot of racism. But what I will say is that, and this is very minor, I'm not saying this is a big deal. However, pretty much 95% of people, maybe more, when I tell them that my dad is Italian and I'm half Italian, look at me with this like, no, you're not. Like, you're too white. You have blonde hair, blonde hair, you have blue eyes. Like, you're not Italian. Like, really, I didn't realize that every Italian looks like an olive oil skinned, dark hair, dark complexion figure like in The Godfather. Because I'm pretty sure that's not accurate, because I've been to Italy several times and it's not true. However, media and everything else gives us this idea of what an Italian's supposed to look like. Like my brother, he's my half brother, but he looks like the quintessential Italian. Dark hair, dark features, dark skin, stud of a dude. He's just always been a stud of a guy. He just looks like one of those really good looking Italian dudes, right? And then like we'll stand next to each other and people are like, there's no way you guys are related, because we couldn't look any more different. But right, like that's the box that people put us in. So speaking of,
I mean, I can relate to, well, I'm half Italian and I'm all Sicilian. And when I tell Italians, like I taught ESL, so that's why I have so many stories about talking to people from, and I taught ESL in America with foreigners who are adults coming to my school. So I taught 126 language groups. I had constant interactions with people. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that Italians also, like Americans, they're much more of like, where are you from? Like a Napoleon is very different from like a Sicilian. And when I would tell them my grandfather's last name, my Italian last name, they would tell me, don't ever say that when you're traveling, because that's Hitler in our country. It's Provenzano. He finally died in 2008. But,
there you go.
So it's just, I'm
that
so
makes
with
sense.
you.
Yeah.
And like, yeah. And the
and I get that too, because my grandma was from Sicily, and my grandpa was from Tuscany.
Yeah, because if you know anything, I was going to say that. That's awesome.
Yeah, and if you know anything about mainland Italy versus Sicily, them being together in Italy when they were together would be like a white person and a black person being together here in the, I don't know, 30s or 40s or 50s or something, right? Like it's very racist against each other. Like, no, you're not Italian, you're Sicilian. No, you're not Sicilian, you're Italian, right? Very, very much so. So it's interesting. Even within its own country. So people like have this idea of Americans being like, really? How? Like you are in your own country and you hate each other. Like I don't understand how you don't understand that we do that as well. We're not all just Americans. So anyway, continue on. I want to hear the rest of your story here. So so you guys get married. Everything's going okay. What ends up happening? What's like the turning point?
Yeah, so we agree. The biggest fight we've ever had was the same fight, and it was about she wanted to move permanently to Thailand. She said America has homeless people. It stinks. It's super expensive. You don't have good food. You guys don't have good values. Your violence crazy. We don't have any of your problems. Not only was she like abundantly right about most of what she was saying, but like I actually love Thailand, and the food there is. You'll never get tired of eating in Thailand. Not a single day of your life. You could eat Thai food every day in Thailand for 6 months straight. I've done it. You will never get tired.
I've only been once. I'm definitely a tourist. I definitely will not speak to Thai culture whatsoever. I was there for a couple of weeks, but while I was there, goodness sake, man, everything I ate on the street in Bangkok was 100 times better than any Thai food I've ever had in the United States of America. It is amazing. And you go somewhere and it costs a couple bucks. At least it did a few years ago when I went. It costs a couple bucks and you're just having this amazing, and you can't go wrong. Like I didn't find... It was like, I mean, Italy's the same, and obviously there's, I have a little bit of a leniency towards or bias, let's say, towards Italy.
Best food countries in the world, so
I would agree.
Like seriously,
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree. I never had any bad food in either country, even in Thailand. Anyway, we digress. So it's going okay.
No, it's cool.
What's the linchpin?
The idea is, she just is like, I never planned on marrying an American and staying in America. All Thai people who are wealthy and privileged and educated. She went to like the Harvard of Thailand. She's very smart, just to give all credit where credit's due. Like very, very, very smart. And so what they do is they come to America and get a master's, and then they bring it home, and that's like a badge of like pride. Very few of them even use the master's degree, just to give you an example, but it's like a certificate of accomplishment, and it separates you from the pack and all that. So I was like, okay, how about this? Let's make a deal. We got married at the very end of 2013. How about if we visit Thailand and live there for 3 months the first couple years of our marriage, live there for 6 months the next couple, and then when it's 2019, we will permanently move to Thailand and only come to America for 3 months a year. So it was like this, like, let's just do it like slowly. And then by like 2014, she was bitching every day about moving there. And I was like, hey, just to be clear, when I agreed to move there in 2019, I didn't agree to move there if you were going to complain about it every day and make me feel shitty. Like that.
For the next 5 years.
Right. And so I hired her at my school because I was a vice principal at this point of the ESL school I was working at. And it was like a really fancy, posh, they went out of business during COVID, but 40 years open, like very like prestigious within San Francisco, not like, anything. And so getting her hired there was a big effing deal because we normally didn't hire speakers of other languages who weren't American because people love, they want to learn our accent. Rich people who travel to America to learn English are very interested in accent reduction, which is impossible, but whatever. So we sold that.
Also, going back to America being the same, like what accent, right? Like there are so. Right. Like the two of us, I would say like we probably don't have a whole lot of accent to a lot of people. Like it's pretty.
We speak the Pennsylvania dialect is what it's called. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. There you go. As opposed to people in the South, and I don't even just mean the South. I mean every state in the South is different, also, and even within that state is different. So it's just like this is even bringing up the whole thing we were talking about earlier. How like again, it's a box of like American dialect. Well, what is that? I mean, I've been to a lot of places in America, and somebody in Wyoming sounds different than somebody in Texas, which sounds different than somebody in the Upper East Side in New York. They sound different, but those are all America.
Great point. Totally accurate. And much to your point, we hired her to teach only the basic level course. So like she would teach like English 1, which is so, I mean, it's like you literally point at like the color red and keep saying the word red until a student can repeat the word red. And so she was great at it. She's full of enthusiasm and she's very personable when she turns it on and all that. The reason I brought this up is we had a coworker, and the coworker was I didn't realize it at the time, but she was my friend, but she was also becoming friends with my wife. unbeknownst to me, this woman had gone through a bad divorce, and it was with a man from another country. And so she was just feeding her constant, like, are you sure you're happy? Is he trying to control you? Because that's what mine was doing to me. So one day she brought up that I was making her go to a wedding in Portland. I was the not priest, but I was the person marrying, like, my best friend and another person that they were marrying. And she's like, I don't want to go. You're making me go. And I was just like, what? And she's like, I don't want to go. And I was like, okay, I hate to break this to you, but, like, you kind of have to. Like, when you get married in America, like, you just have to go to a wedding with your spouse. Like, even if you're on, like, the verge of divorce, which we weren't at that point. So she's like, okay, I'll go. And so we get there, and then she got, like, even more mad, and she screamed at me the morning of the wedding. Like, and she's like, I'm not going. Like, and I'd never seen her scream. I'd never seen any of this. It blew my mind. It terrified me. I was able to piece things together and, like, get her to go. She had a great time at the wedding. She loved the trip. On the way home, she's like, I'm sorry, blah, blah, blah. But then that temper started to rear its ugly head, like, oh, I don't know, every day. And then multiple times a day. It got so bad at one point, I was, like, calling my brother from a closet at 2 a.m. and I'm just like, she just keeps yelling at me. My friend who had married a Japanese woman, I kind of hinted at it to him, and he said, this is his phrasing, not mine, so sue him. He said, Thais are the Latinos of the Asian world. They're phenomenally famous. They're women for having a loose temper and, like, losing it, which, if you know, in America, that's our total stereotype of a Latino woman. So then we went to Thailand to live there, and one night, like, she lost her temper in front of her parents with me, and they started laughing. And they're like, oh, so she's finally showing you the real her. And they just thought it was hysterical. And so apparently she had just, like, hidden that because it was, like, the whole, like, and she wasn't, like, just because people stereotype Asians, she wasn't some, like, docile Asian flower who doesn't talk. Like, that's a very, like, Japanese stereotype, and it's a stereotype. She was a Thai woman. She's loud and flamboyant and all that, but she did hide her anger problems from me, for sure, 100%, for at least 3 years. This is what that guy's email was referring to. This is what he was trying to warn me about, but she hid it for that long. So the first time she yelled at me in that hotel, I got an intuitive message. Now that it's 2024, I'm incredibly intuitively driven. I do not listen to my logical brain anymore at all. You asked about inner peace, that's your solution. Right there. It's simple. One piece of advice. If your brain's telling you to do it, check in with your heart, feeling, your intuition. And if it corresponds, do it. And if it says no, just don't do it. No questions asked. And if it tells you not to go to the coffee shop you go to every morning and to go to a different one, just go. And if nothing happens, move on with your day. That's my little advice partway through the podcast.
So tell us again, what is it about, because I was really intrigued by that. So going back to the whole kind of inner peace thing that we started with at the beginning of the podcast, just tell us what you said again, kind of in steps, because I think that's really good.
I would like to give credit to the source of the biggest life change, which is there's a woman named Lynn Bunch. She lives in Phoenix, Arizona. And when I was at the depths of depravity, when I was the most derelicted failure dad ever, my ex-wife had abducted my son. The State Department had told me with 2 middle fingers to go find someone who cares, and I was going bankrupt. And a woman in a coffee shop said, I always see you here, and you just look, like, angry. And I said, oh no, that's my resting bitch face when I work. I look like that. And she's like, oh, okay, so everything's going great in your life. And I looked at her, and for some reason, I just decided to be honest. I think it's because she was attractive, to be very honest. I just think that's why. I think I was just like, oh, I'll tell a pretty woman that this horrible moment in her life. And I just said, no, I'm not. And she's like, what's wrong?
I've never experienced that before, Mike. I've never experienced a pretty woman coming up and me be like, okay, I'll do anything. Just tell me what to do. No guys are going to relate to that at all that listen to this podcast. They're going to be like, oh, I'm much stronger than that. I don't need a woman. Yeah, right. Give me a fucking break, you guys. Continue, sorry.
I love it. No, it was great. So anyway, I told her, just briefly, I just said, oh, I have an ex-wife and she stole my son and it doesn't look like I'm going to get him back. And she looked at me and she said, I once had the worst experience of my life happen, and someone told me to visit this woman, Lynn, and it changed my life. I still talk to her almost daily, and she's the best. She'll help you with whatever you need. So I looked her up on the internet, and all she had was, like, a contact page to write her. So I wrote her, and I just said, hey, I'd really like to book an appointment with you. How much does it cost? Like, blah, blah, blah. I didn't plan on telling the story, and it's kind of long, so I'm just going to completely truncate it. She got back to me. I met with her. She's the most amazing person in the world, and basically what she did is from that moment on, she went back and traced it with me, and she showed me how every single human who feels like they're not successful is on what she calls a plan B, and the way to get back to your plan A is just to simply go back to listening to your intuitive voice. So back to answer your direct question, your intuitive voice is undeniable and very clear, and it's always there, and you know it, and you've listened to it, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, whoever you are. I can give examples to skeptics, but there really aren't any. Most people, even the most atheistic, like Richard Dawkins fan ever, will admit that there's this feeling system in us called intuition, and it does work, and it has powers to it. So I'm just talking about that.
I've heard people. I would say the two most common things people call this, from my experience, and you tell me your experience, but the two most common things that I hear people call this is gut or God. Right? I hear those two all the time.
Yeah.
Like my gut says this, or God says this, or right? Like those are the two things. And who knows if it's gut or God or intuition or whatever, but it seems like it's all the same thing, right? It's like I have this undeniable feeling, whether it's coming from my own gut or my intuition or my soul or God or higher power, whatever, right? I have this undeniable feeling that like this is the next thing to do. And I've found in my life, Mike, and you're probably of the same, for a long time in my life, I had a really hard time listening to it. I didn't trust it. I thought that it was full of shit.
Exactly.
When I finally and I had to go through a bunch of shit first before I got to a point where I'm like, oh, and then I started paying attention to it. And then all of a sudden I realized, wow, every time I don't listen to this, it turns out badly for me. Like every single time. So I firmly believe in this. So sorry. Step one, you have an intuitive gut, intuitive.
Whatever you call it.
I don't remember what you called it. Right.
Yeah, no, and actually to your point, when athletes who are phenomenally successful thank their accomplishments on God, they're really just saying intuition. And if you really study like the Bhagavad Gita or any of these things, they really are telling you your ego is a false sense of authorship. You're not in control. You have zero control, not even like one iota of it, but your intuition will give you joy as you go through this controlless experience. And much to your point, most people, especially in our socialized Western world, who are men, this is really, really common. Men tend to not listen to intuition because we associate it as a feminine trait, and we think it's like why women argue the way they do and we don't know that. But like the fact is that doesn't have anything to do with logic or not logic. Intuition is not logical or illogical. It is just intuition, and it's a pipe. And if you block it, you tend to go through utter shit. And that's why she says plan B and plan A. She doesn't call it like hell because it's not hell. It's just a plan that you didn't plan on, but you're there when you're there. So yes, and more yes to everything you said. So that woman, Lynn, has helped me see that. But what I'm going to go back to now, the moment, you wanted me to. So when that voice is there, listen to it, A. But what's much more common for my advice to people is when you feel like doing something, check that voice. Ask it. Don't ask for permission. It's not like your ruler. Just check with it. The same way you might like Google something you just said to someone out loud to make sure you got it right. You know, like, oh, America was founded in 1776, but you know what? I'm a little foggy. Let me check that. Like,
is that as simple as just checking in and being like, what do you think about this?
Well, you use the word I use, actually, which is checking in. That's exactly the phrase I use, and that's what the woman taught me. And yes, it's checking in with like this buddy you have. And this is why it gets weird, is it's hard to talk about it because people personify and anthropomorphize like things differently. And people like, some people are like born thinking about God. So your belief system has a lot to do with what you're going to call this. Gut tends to appeal to not so religious, Western, especially men, I would say. God really appeals to people who want it to be God. I'm in between, so that's why I call it intuition. Gut works well for me, though. And actually, the first novel that I
people use
real success.
Universe too.
Yes, totally. Universe Source is another really popular.
If that's the third one, one that I hear a lot is like the universe or the source or whatever is kind of showing me what to do, which is more maybe, I don't know, metaphysical or astrological or something in that realm of, maybe more people like that call it that. So it's interesting to me though that at the end of the day, it all seems like it's talking about the same thing.
Yes, and I agree with you. And I think the hardest part about what you just asked me is it's a trust thing that you have to develop with yourself. Like if you're used to not trusting it, it's going to be really hard at first because, spoiler alert, it's going to contradict a lot of your selfish desires. It is, because it's actually not good for you to be selfish. It's been proven fake altruism works. Like caring is sharing. Like you give, you tend to get back from it. Hospice is a good example. Like I'd have a shitty attitude on the way in because I'm like, I don't want to work like this many hours, and then I have to clean shit from a woman's vagina and she's in her 80s, and then I'd leave and I'd be like, I clean shit from a woman's vagina in her 80s. It's like crazy how it works. But so
yeah,
intuition,
there's on that note, and we are the best ADHD people ever for this
like
podcast
the
today.
Funniest experience of my life.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I'm having a great time. I don't even care if the listeners are having a great time. I'm having a great time, so it's all good. But here, the other thing that makes me think about is there's a lot of talk, and I think maybe in the world, again, I can just speak to right where I live. But I think that there's a lot of talk about focusing on yourself and improving yourself and self-help and all these. And this podcast is even listed as self-help under several, categories, because that's probably where it would fall. And there's a lot of focus on that. And I'm not against that, because I'm a person that didn't have a self, or said a better way, lost myself for a long time of my adult life, where I just didn't even know who I was, and I didn't know how to listen to my gut and all these other sort of things. So I'm not against that. However, what I see a lot of the times is that people that are so focused on that, to your point, they're so focused on that. If you're only focused on that, then all of a sudden, isn't that the same thing as a narcissist who just doesn't give a shit about anybody else? And, I had a mentor tell me a long time ago, and he's still an ongoing mentor for me, and I love his advice. And one of the things he always talks about is he's like, anytime you're struggling or you need to get out of your head, go find a way to be of service.
Wow.
And I love that, because every time I'm able to, now, the word serve kind of can sometimes have a negative connotation for me, because I grew up in a very religious, Christian, conservative household. For any listeners that are there, you might relate to that, because all of a sudden it's always about being a servant and service, and you don't matter, is kind of where that goes if you go too far. But that's not his point. His point is, if you're in your head, right? The other expression I've heard a lot is, if you're in your head, you're dead, right?
Yeah.
If you're in your head and you're so focused on yourself, it becomes counterproductive, because at least in my life, where I have found the most joy, and I'm a selfish piece of shit a lot of the time. So I'm not saying I have perfected this, but what I'm saying is, if I'm in one of those mindsets and I can go find a way to serve somebody, and serving somebody could just be calling somebody I haven't talked to in a long time that I know is going through something, or maybe I don't know they're going through. Like, I literally just texted a couple of people today because I hadn't talked to them in a while. I was like, hey, how's it going? Want to check in with you, right? And just even that element, that very small piece, just still makes me feel better, because I'm not doing it for any selfish motivational reason. Like, I'm not going to get anything out of that except for the fact that, like, oh, maybe I can be a little bit of a light to this person right now. So anyway, I just wanted to share that, because I think it's really, I think there's a bad rap out there right now of people like trying to work on themselves and being selfish, like you said. And I think that's the reason why. There's nothing wrong with trying to figure out who you are and figure out what your intuition is and figure out where your gut are. Those are all critical to what you're talking about right now. But if you're only doing that and then you're not focusing on other people, it's a shitty life, man. I've lived it.
Yeah. I'm totally with you. And I think it goes back to why I said, like, everyone should start a podcast, because if you start a podcast and you're helping someone, you're helping someone. So there's like a lot of
Absolutely.
Selfishness meets selflessness in like pure intentionality and things like that. Yeah. And I think Marcus Aurelius, who like is kind of like the fan favorite for the Stoicism revival and all this, like, he would be rolling over in his grave if he saw like what people were misinterpreting about what he was saying, because he was all about service and all about that kind
of course
stuff.
He was. Yeah, look at his life and tell me he wasn't about service. That's bullshit. Yeah. But we'd rather pull out like one little saying from him or something in order to feel better about ourselves, right? Like, I need to work on myself because here's what Marcus Aurelius said. Okay, well, that's not what he meant in context. But that'd be the first time anybody's ever taken anything out of context, right?
Yeah.
None of us do that.
I just want to give props to whoever that is. That's incredible what he said. I think that's like, I'm going to remember that, and that's a good takeaway for me. And it's easy when you have kids and stuff, because you can just go serve them. Like, it's really easy what you said if you're in a family. And also, like, or like say yes when you want to say no is another favorite of mine. Just see what happens. Don't be so afraid of like losing that control because you didn't have it anyway.
And as somebody that might listen to the podcast and can relate to this, like I can be a pretty extreme person. here's what we're not saying also. It doesn't have to be an extreme act. Like I said, it's a text. It's going and just checking on your kids, just getting face to face with your kids, just being like, hey, love you. What's going on? Play with them for 5 minutes, right? Like it's little things. It doesn't have to be this huge, you don't have to take everybody to Disney World. Like it could just be, let's just go have a couple minutes face to face, right?
And actually it's funny because all this conversation, I think the one thing I would gift and wish I could give to my ex is the gift of going through what you and I have gone through, because I can tell she hasn't. She's not following her intuition, and and actually I'm just gonna finish an earlier part of the story that I told, because in case I don't get to give all the details, eventually after like a long absence of getting to see my son on Skype, her father was the one who called me with him, and we made eye contact and talked for the first time, very like surface level, but he looked at me and I looked at him, man to man, not white men, but man to man. And it was just understood. It was, this has gone too far. I feel shitty. You feel shitty. We don't need to make a big deal out of this. This is not how this should have gone.
With the dad?
Yeah, with her dad, but not with her.
Wow.
I'm trying to make sure I separate that. The reason I still don't have a good relationship with my son is because the mother is not facilitating it or helping. But the few times I have gotten to interact with him, well, I can jump to the end and
so
I can
let's
backtrack.
Let's fast forward a little bit, because what I'm really curious to get to, and I want to make sure we get to with the time that we have, is I really want to give some hope to guys specifically that maybe have a hard relationship with their, ex-spouse or ex-whoever. Doesn't have to be a spouse, obviously, but let's just say their kid's mom, and they're just trying to figure out, they're in a hard situation, maybe not the same as yours, but tell us a little bit about what your actual situation is right now. And honestly, like I want to know how you deal with it, man. Like I just don't know how you go through every single day and you're just able to handle what you're going through, because it's rough.
Yeah. I'll bullet point to how we got to where she abducted my son. The marriage was starting to fall apart. We had a son. He was 1 year old when we decided to move to Arizona, where my parents had retired to be closer to them. Still doing the live in Thailand thing, but we were just relocating to Arizona so we'd have at least community support. It was very hard for us in Oakland because we didn't have any family around. We had friends, but they all worked. And so, and we both were teachers, so daycare wasn't really an option. So we moved to Arizona. He's one. We fight even more. We see a couples counselor. I don't know what your experience was like, but fuck couples counseling. Don't ever go to it. If you're already at the stage where you're talking about it, just admit you fucked up and backtrack and work the marriage out, or just get a fucking divorce right there. Use the money you would have paid on that stupid counselor. And I love counselors, and my mother-in-law is one, and I'm not saying they aren't trying their best. I'm just saying it's going to typically turn into a bickering weird thing, and ours was terrible. Ironically, when we stopped doing couples therapy was when our relationship got a rebound. Like, we actually started getting better at Thailand. And at the end of the trip, she said, I hate Thailand. I don't want to move here. I had a horrible time. My parents are weird. Like, it was the weirdest thing. So we come back. My son is 1.5 now. And we're back in Arizona. And then things go right back to where they were, though. They got really bad again. And she kept saying, I want a divorce. I want a divorce, for like years. So finally one day I said, if you say it one more time, I'm going to get a divorce. And she's like, I do it. So I go in the other room and I like start looking up a family attorney, and I get 500 texts on like out of nowhere, like friends I haven't heard from in a long time. They're like, is everything okay? What's going on? Is everything okay? I'm like, huh? Apparently, while I went in the other room, she went on Facebook and posted, how do you get a divorce? And the reason this matters is, like, my ex is not a mature person, and that's basically the big problem throughout. That's the through line. The through line is she's not mature. Her dad is therefore kind of in control. So we get a divorce. It was actually really amicable. We didn't go to court or anything. She didn't accuse me of anything. Her dad came out. He tried to buy a house for her near mine, but he decided not to. And then the only thing they were really sticklers about was that visitation had to occur. That my son had to go to Thailand at least once a year, if not more, to visit the family there. We agreed that we'd wait until he was 3. But after the divorce, on her birthday, which was like in April, and he was going to turn 2 in October, I decided out of the kindness of my heart, or whatever weird reasons, to let her leave a year early and take him to Thailand. So she decided to take him right after he turned 2. So we got him a passport. We did all this stuff. And then as the trip got closer, like, she was at my parents' house for his 2nd birthday. There's a photo of us having birthday cake with him. She was getting along. I helped her pack for the trip. Or I didn't help her pack, but I picked her up from her apartment and drove her and my son to the airport. I made plans to go to Ecuador while they were there because like you, I love traveling and I hadn't been able to in a long time. So I dropped them off at the airport. Her bag's too heavy, so I actually had to like open it. And this is what I meant to say when I said I helped her pack. And I had to help her like unpack things so it would like meet the weight requirement. And the reason that matters is she did not pack like she was leaving permanently. I guarantee you, if you're listening, she left on that trip thinking I am coming back with my son. There's two reasons that probably is true. One, I don't think they planned on doing what they did. Two, I think that if they had told her that they were going to do it, she's a bad liar and she would have tripped up and they didn't want to blow it. Okay. The only thing that was weird on the way up to the trip was that her dad kept incessantly asking for me to give her the passport ahead of time. Like he was like really concerned about that. But it also might just be because she's bad with things and loses things. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of reasons. So she goes to Thailand. I go to Ecuador. We FaceTime because I'm in Ecuador, and we FaceTime like every day. Me and my son, everything's fine. I raised my son every day of his life till he's 2. We have a great relationship. And then the night she's supposed to fly home, Halloween Eve, October 30th, I get an email and it says, I hurt my back carrying my luggage down the stairs and the doctor told me I shouldn't fly. So I write back, I'm like, okay, like, and I try to get in touch and like, she isn't picking up the phone and things are just getting weird. I got to flash you the story. So even though this is super dramatic and like, blah, 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 one thing leads to another. I finally call the State Department. I get an email from her father that's I'm sorry. Her father has her account email my parents, not even me. And it's a letter and it's very dismissive. Think that wedding story I told him. It basically says, we have decided that we all know my daughter can't live alone in Arizona. We all know that she can't actually function and keep a job and be a single mom. It's not fair to her. So I send the letter to the State Department and I'm just, what the hell? And so this is where things go really wrong and where I didn't listen to my intuition. I hire a lawyer. The lawyer is very aggressive. He sends like this like kitchen sink thing, he calls it to them, which shows like mugshot photos of them. He's going to tell Interpol what they did. They have to adhere to the International Hague Treaty, which Thailand had recently signed on to. The State Department told me, like, good luck with all that, but here's the truth. Thailand does what Thailand does. No one in America has any control over what Thailand's going to do. If you're living like right now and you heard about Brittany Griner in Russia, this should give you a good idea of just how much power our State Department has. To get a famous WNBA player released from another country, they had to trade a like convicted mass murderer back to Russia. The State Department does not go to bat for your child and son. And you said like specifically for fathers out there, I want to make this very clear. If you're going to get in a cross-cultural relationship and you're going to like go through all this, just be very careful because America, fuck yeah, like that's not really true. That's true with our military. It's not true with like individual citizens. If you get caught smoking weed in Czech Republic, you're probably gonna go to a fucking Czech jail. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So just real quick to back up. So your son is a U.S. citizen.
100%.
So a U.S. citizen now is in another country, and the State Department basically is like, well, good luck.
Well, they say you have to go through the peaceful diplomatic route. You have to file a case. You have to get your case heard in Thailand. It's going to be incredibly expensive. At one point, I was paying a lawyer in Thailand, a lawyer in America, and a lawyer in England, and I was paying them to talk to each other and coordinate documents. I got ripped off by 2 Thai firms. They just fleeced me for 10 grand, one of them. They also like had pleasant, kind conversations with her dad and like seemed to be taking his side. I was told by my Thai teacher who was teaching me the language, I think what they did was despicable, but no one in my country thinks it's really that bad because you're a dad. And she just kept telling me over and over again, dads don't raise children in our culture. It would be unheard of for like you to co-raise us. Like it just does not compute. And you asked me how I sleep at night. A lot of it is just like understanding 2 principles of life. One, I have no control. And the more I try to have control, the more I can't sleep at night. The more I obsess over thinking I can do things, the less happy my life is. The more I give into this like absurd notion of, you know what, even if your religion told you to serve everyone and never think about yourself, so what? You don't have control over what your religion tells you. You don't have control over how to like, there were people born into slavery and they had their legs cut off. There are people in foreign countries right now getting blown up, and there's people in America getting blown up, and there's people getting domestically violated all the time. And the point is, you are where you are, and you can either resist it and feel conflict, or you can accept it. And this is where I've like even lost friends over this. accepting it doesn't mean you like say it's okay, and it doesn't mean you like send thank you cards to people. It just literally means like, hey, this card that I got is not the card that's going to win this poker game. I am accepting that this is my card. So my card in life is I live every day without constant access to my son. I miss him like all hell. And basically, in reverse, what I can tell you is that he was right about almost everything. She couldn't have survived here. What I was doing to her was actually cruel. It wasn't coming from a cruel spot, but I was like forcing her, because she made a horrible mistake and married me, to remain the rest of her life without her family in a foreign country, raising a kid until he's 18. Meanwhile, what they did to me is terrible and blah, 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 but it's like still not the same. I live here. I'm an American. I have my family. I miss my son. So I'm trying to help the audience instead of just like talk me about my story. And so what I'm really trying to help them see is that like the process to get to how I'm talking now could have been faster. The point isn't what's fair or right. The point is, are you upset about feeling that way or not? And if you subtract and just keep pulling back the layers of what's upsetting you, it always comes down to this. You refuse to let what is be. It's what Ram Dass talked about. It's what Marcus Aurelius talked about. It's what all these truly gifted people. And also notice, Ram Dass had a child out of, like, he didn't know about. Ram Dass was in the closet about being gay for most of his life. Marcus Aurelius did not, like, everyone fucks up. Everyone fails. Everyone has these problems. But the difference is the people who still know how to smile and get up in the morning and chop wood and carry water are the people who understand that, like, that is your burden and that is yours and only yours. And it's not your job to let it crush you. And it's not your job to fucking over talk about it and make everyone else have a problem about it.
One person that I think is a particular hero of mine is a man that I've never met and never will meet, named Viktor Frankl. And he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, right? Which was very popular. And, you know, for anybody that's listening that doesn't know, feel free, go check out the book. It's a great book. But to very, very briefly, he was in concentration camps during the Nazi occupancy. He was a psychologist and basically wrote an entire book about finding meaning in the middle of a concentration camp. Like, if there's a place to not find meaning, that's it, right? Like, I can't think of many worse places to try to find meaning for your life than that. And he wrote the entire book. And, you know, really, from what I can tell, encouraged other people and everything else while he was there. And a lot of what he wrote in the book was the fact that it was fascinating to read all of these people having the exact same experience. Not exact, but pretty much the exact same experience. They're all in, you know, concentration camps. It's pretty much the same experience. And how dramatically different some people's experience was versus others, including his. He had such a passion to do this that part of the story is that he wrote the entire book, they took it from him, and then he had to write the entire thing from memory when he got out of the concentration camp. And I think it was his belief that it actually turned out better because he had to write it from his memory, because it was from his intuition, his gut, his God, right? To go back to our previous conversation. And I think that that's really interesting. You know, somebody that I listen to pretty often talks about how basically there are no things that happen. I don't remember the exact phrase, but he basically says there are no things that happen. It's all our perception. So in other words, it's not a joint. We don't all have the same experience, but we all have different perceptions of that experience. It's kind of like why you go to court and you have 5 different witnesses saying 5 different things about the exact same car accident, because we all have a different perception of what actually occurred. So, you know, that's not saying there is no truth. It's just saying that there is no truth as far as an experience goes, because everybody has a different part of the experience, right? We all perceive something different. So, you know, somebody could be in your shoes, Mike, and just be living a very bitter, angry, resentful life. I don't think that would be much of a stretch for you to even see why somebody would be living like that with your experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, totally. And actually, the reason I'm not is what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reason you're not, from what I hear, is the fact that you're trying to stay present with what actually is. Like, what is, and then how do I stay in that? Because if you escape that and you spend your entire life just feeling ripped off and resentful and mad at your kid's mom and the fact that you can't see him and everything else. Like, what good is that going to do for him in his life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. First of all, it's awesome that you mentioned Frankel's book, because I read it at the height of everything in my life is horrible. You know, like he was taken October 30th, 2017, and I think I read that book in like January 2018. Like, it was very much a part of this. He was the first person to, like, it clicked, and like he kept talking about his wife, and how much he loved his wife, and how he would just think about. So I started focusing on and again, that woman Lynn helped me with this. Instead of looking at what I'd lost, I started looking at what was ahead. And what was ahead was actually meeting the woman I'd always known I would meet, actually having children with her and the family I knew I deserved, and never forgetting my son, saying he's dead to me or anything like that, but letting him go in a peaceful way until he returns, if he returns. And I don't say if usually, but I'm saying that just to be fair in the, you know, different audiences. To me, I could die before he comes back into my life and all that. I mean, he's in my life. Like, again, just so people understand, the first 2 years they were gone, since I had a lawsuit going, they were playing nice. So I was Skyping with my son when he was 3 and 4, and they weren't telling him shitty things about me. And I was sending him gifts. And then COVID hit, and I like mailed him like paintings, and he like, there's pictures of him like blowing me kisses. And like, I mean, I had a great relationship with him. When he turned 6, it really abruptly changed. And part of it is because like, they started giving him access to the iPad with the Skype account. And so it's kind of his choice now to call me back, answer, or like whatever. And he's 8 going on 9. And I can just tell you that, like, for reasons I don't want to get into, and it's also just me playing like armchair psychologist, my son now is the one who doesn't want to talk to me. It's not about her or anyone else. And so that's the road I'm at now. And so that's why I'm trying hard. Like, I didn't want to say his name because, like, yeah, and I don't know in Thailand how much social media and stuff, but what I do is I go on podcasts and talk about this freely. I write about it whenever I feel like it on my site, and I'm open about it because it's also my right to help other people, and that is truly what Viktor Frankl did and what I want to do. And I'm not like him, and the Holocaust is way fucking worse than what I went through. I'm being really honest, it is. And I didn't lose my son. My son didn't drown in a pool. I'm not a grieving parent whose son died. My son is flourishing. He's in a very nice household with servants in Thailand. He goes to the finest schools. He's bilingual. What I don't know about him is how much he thinks his dad doesn't care. I don't know, like, these thoughts that matter to me. But again, those are the selfish thoughts of a dad. And so I know,
well,
it sounds
you know,
weird to people,
there's a couple of things too that you said that not only would I encourage you about, but I would encourage our listeners too, is the fact that I know that this is easy for me as well, right? And you made a couple comments. Number one is that obviously your situation is not as bad as the Holocaust, which I would agree with, right? Like, I mean, I think it's hard to disagree with that, right? And however, what I know I've done in the past, and I know a lot of other people do because I've heard it, is that sometimes people use that to invalidate their experience and to minimize it and to be like, well, it's not as bad as the Holocaust. Like, I do it sometimes where I'm like, man, I'm living a blessed life. Like, no bombs are falling on my house. My kids aren't getting, taken, or like my girlfriend raped, or like all these terrible things that are happening all over the world right now. But I think we have to be careful with that because your experience is still awful. I mean, there's still awful elements of it. And it's, of course, how you look at it. But it's okay for you to grieve and for it to be awful, even if it's not as bad as somebody else's awful experience. And I think this kind of goes back maybe full circle to what we started talking about at the beginning of this podcast, of why it's difficult for men specifically to start being vulnerable and open about this. And what I've experienced with a lot of men, specifically in my life, is that it seems pretty consistent that we minimize things like this. Like, well, it's not as bad as whoever. Like, I still have both my legs. Like, it's I think it was Abraham Lincoln. My dad used to quote it to me all the time growing up. I think it was Abraham Lincoln. I could be misquoting this. If you're listening, look this up and shoot me an email because I'm not going to bother later on. But I believe it was Abraham Lincoln that said something like, I was complaining about not owning shoes until I saw a man with no feet, something like that. And the whole point is, like, yeah, you don't have shoes, but there's always somebody worse. There's always somebody that doesn't have feet or doesn't have legs or can't move a muscle or anything else, right? And we could live in this victim, resentful, angry mentality, or we could be Stephen Hawking and write a book when you literally can't do anything with any part of your body. Right? Like,
Yeah.
how cool is that? We love or hate the guy. I don't care. You got to respect the fact that somebody that has all odds against him, right, can still somehow look past that and realize, like, I'm here for a bigger purpose. And for you, Mike, I think your bigger purpose right now is talking to a lot of the people that are listening that are going through a hard time, that they not only can relate to your story and be like, oh man, hopefully it gives some people, it's giving me right now gratitude and just feeling blessed that I get to see my kids so often, right?
Hell yeah. Yeah.
And I could, of course, everything's a spectrum. So I could, of course, look at the dads that get more time with their kids and be like, oh, I don't get any time with my kid. And I could just be resentful in that. Or I could listen to your story and be like, oh my God, at least I get to see my kids. That's awesome. But not in a comparison way, but just hopefully to be grateful. And what I'm also hoping it does for people is that people don't feel shame over your story. Your story is your story, whether it's yours or anybody else's. My story is my story. Let's not feel shame over it, but let's also huddle around the fact that it is what it is. And can I control this? Am I able to control, like, is there something that I can actually do about this? To your point earlier, none of us really have any control, but is there something that I can do about this? And maybe the something I can do is just living with it and just being present to it. It doesn't mean that you're going to stop fighting for your son. I don't get that impression from you at all. You're going to fight for your son and what's best for him no matter what. And I hope one day you guys get reunited and you get to spend time with them and get to know him and everything else. Of course, I really, really hope that happens to you. But in the meantime, are you going to spend your days being bitter and resentful and angry at everybody, or the opposite, where, man, it sounds like it's been, as terrible as this has been for you, it also sounds like it's been a huge blessing. Because, like, I don't know, man, maybe you wouldn't have met the woman that you're with right now if you wouldn't have had this experience.
Well, actually,
and maybe you wouldn't have had more kids and everything else. Yeah, go for it. Go for it. Let's do it. I'd love to end. Yeah, why don't we do that? Because I know we're about to end here, but why don't you end us with that? Because I love this hope aspect of it. Yeah, tell me.
This is actually the best part of the story to me. So if you remember, I used to tell students when I taught, like, the story, I would teach the word kismet and, like, serendipity, and I would teach, like, any of these, like, words that mean when, like, truly universal things conspire in your favor, about how I met my now ex-wife. What's really extra ironic about all this is at the same time, before I met her, when I was living in Oakland, little did I know that the woman I would marry in 15 years had moved to San Francisco because she had an intuitive feeling that the guy she was supposed to meet was there. And she was on all of, like, the apps except the one I was on for dating. And I was on all the ones except the ones that she was on.
No way. Seriously.
We should have met. Like, I would go to her fucking neighborhood in the marina and drink at night with, like, my friends from school and stuff. Like, it is crazy how many times we should have met. And we both agree. We're like, we both get goosebumps when we talk about it. And so, but again, like, it was her not listening, being open-minded enough to go on these other apps. She's Jewish, and she was only on, like, JDate and, like, these other ones. And I, as I said, I'm not religious, so I don't really, like, call myself a Jew and identify with that at all. And so I was never on JDate because I'm like, I don't want to get into this crazy Jewish culture. And by the way, it's 2024, and I was right. Like, it is insane to be an American Jew. Like, you're just tied between, like, foreign alliances and bullshit. And so, but I'm now married to her, and I'm with her. And the reason I said I'll tie this up really nice is it was exactly what I'd always known was going to happen. Like, I knew the second I met her, she was the one. That's why I shouldn't have married my ex. That's why you, if you're listening, it's not about bells and whistles, and it's not about a sexual attraction or physical attraction. It's not about any of that bullshit. It's literally the person makes you feel unvulnerable. They make you feel like being vulnerable. They encourage you to be the depraved, derelict self that you are. Not like a shitty, not encouraging you to, like, actually act out on that, but, like, to open up and admit you're that so they can help you heal and that you can help them heal. And so I'm with her. I'm married. We had a wedding 3 weeks before fucking COVID. It was the best thing ever. It was like this huge party. Everyone was there. The whole country shut down like 3 weeks later. We have 2 beautiful children. Both of them can't wait to meet their brother someday. I, like, definitely know that that's going to hook him a little bit more into coming back into my life, because he has, like, legitimate flesh and blood, and I'm sure she does not have more kids for a lot of reasons, but I'm as sure as I can be. I don't 100% know that, but so the story ends pretty well because my son knows how to find me. I know how to send him messages. He does sort of read them. I don't know how well he reads or if his mom helps him. They have called randomly. I will always send him stuff on his birthday. I used to mail things regularly. I love him. I'm proud of him. We definitely will have a good future together. And even if we don't, I am the happiest I've ever been. All of my dreams have come true, and like then some. And it's just like, but again, they didn't come true because Viktor Frankl or any of this other shit. They came true because I started listening to my intuition again. You don't have to pay any fucking money for it. It was born in you and it will exceed you when you die. There's a thing called intuition, and just use it and you'll be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike. It's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Really
today.
Great time. Yeah, I can't wait to have you on my podcast too. So
good. Yeah. I can't wait either. It's going to be fantastic. It's awesome. And again, to everybody listening out there, I hope what you're taking away from Mike's story is the fact that first of all, just get rid of the bullshit if it's not the same as your story. Who fucking cares? No one cares. We don't have the same story either. But one thing that's in common is the fact that you have an inner peace, an inner intuition, a soul, a gut, a God leading you, whatever you want to call it, that knows what to do, honestly, that will stick with your morals, your guidelines, everything else. Now, what we're not saying, I don't think Mike's saying this either, that doesn't mean just do whatever the fuck you want unchecked, because that's not that's not your intuition or your gut either. This is not a call to being a selfish narcissist. That's not what we're saying. You still need mentors in your life. You need accountability in your life. You need people around you so that if you think you're doing something like that, they can call your bullshit. Right? I mean, of course we all need that. If we don't need that and power goes unchecked, we see throughout history, around the world today, what that fucking does, including in our own country right now. And it's shit. It's shit. Let's just fucking end it. Okay. So that's not what we're saying. However, what I really hope you're taking away from what Mike shared is we all have these failures and these difficulties and these struggles that we go through. How are we going to choose to experience it? Are we going to choose to experience it like Viktor Frankl and write a book that has impacted millions and millions of people because of how amazing his perception is of how to deal with things? Or are we going to be like other people that I'm sure he knew that just gave up and then just said, fuck it. I don't want to do this. I'm just done. And I mean, honestly, like even with this podcast, sometimes Mike, sometimes I'm like, fuck it. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to find people and record and edit and do all that sort of stuff. But my hope always is going back to one of my mentors I mentioned previously. One of the other things that he says is he's in the arts, and he talks, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, where he says when he goes into a new thing that he's going to do, a play, a movie, whatever, his whole goal is just that one person is positively impacted by it and it changes their life. And I think that's fantastic. So let's all maybe tone down on how many followers do I have? How many listeners do I have? How many friends do I have? Whatever the fuck is your thing that social media is making you think that that's what you need. Why don't we just cut down on that and just say, hey man, how could I positively serve or impact one person a day? I think that'd be amazing. If we could all do that, it'd be an amazing world. So Mike, again, thank you so much for having us. For all the listeners, thank you so much for being here. Whether you watched on video, you listened to it, we really appreciate you. Appreciate adding another derelict to the tribe, Mike. Thanks.
Yeah,
welcome.
Awesome.
And again, if you like this episode, please like, subscribe, and send it out. Maybe that you have a friend that's going through something similar. Maybe they're going through something different, and maybe Mike's story would be helpful to them as well. So again, I really appreciate you joining us, Mike. And thanks for being here, man.
Thank you so much. I had a great time. And actually, to that point, if anyone needs to contact me about like really, really personal advice on a similar enough issue, I'm open book. So
perfect. We'll add it to the show notes. Be sure to check out the show notes for that and other things. So until next time, we'll see you later, you derelicts.